From the book One Man's Family, the first 2 pages of Chapter 1, The Worlands, in the United States. December the 10th, 1672, came John Worland, of Charles County, and proved his right to 50 acres of land for his transporting of himself into this province in anno 1662. From this man have sprung 12 generations of Worlands, of whom we now have records of around 6,500 persons. Records of this immigrant ancestor are not difficult to locate. In fact, we are not yet positive whether there were 2 John Worlands or 1, as there is a record of head rights being collected by William Jeremy, September 15th, 1664, in Lower Norfolk County, Virginia, for ye transportation of himself John Worland and Richard Hopham into this colony arrived. We have not as yet proved whether this is our John Worland or not. Lord Baltimore was eager for colonists, and paid the same for immigrants across the border from neighboring Virginia as he did for immigrants across the Atlantic Ocean. The will of John Worland the first was probated in Charles County, Maryland, in 1702. His sole heir was his son John, to whom he left 2 plantations, New Alresford and Docker's Delight, in case his son died without issue or marriage. New Alresford was to go to the Protestant minister of William and Mary Parish in Charles County. This might indicate that he was a Protestant, but it could also indicate that he was a Catholic who found it necessary to conceal the fact because of the oppression of the Catholics in Maryland at that time. John Worland II apparently left only 1 son, John Worland III. After the death of John Worland III, the families left Maryland, and by 1810 almost all the Worlands known to be living at that time were in Kentucky, having joined with about 60 other Catholic families in a compact to migrate to that state between 1785 and 1807. This migration was inspired by the great poverty endured in Maryland and the promise of a better life in Kentucky. When immigrants came to Maryland and found tobacco so much more profitable than food crops that it was soon necessary to pass laws that for every 10 acres of tobacco planted, the farmer must plant 1 acre of corn. Tobacco was legal tender in Maryland until long after the Revolution, as pork was sometimes at a later date in Kentucky. This process of exploiting the land with soil-depleting tobacco and without modern methods of fertilization had gone on for over a century at the time of the Revolution, and had left the land thoroughly worn out and the people poverty-stricken. As the lands of the West opened up, many of these people migrated. In Maryland, a group of Catholic families agreed to come to Kentucky. There is strong evidence that there was a written compact to this effect, but the compact itself has not yet been found. 60 families signed the compact, and they were arriving in Kentucky at about the time Kentucky became a state in 1792. They came in groups for 2 reasons: protection against the Indians, and the hope of forming communities which would have a priest to minister to their spiritual needs. Thomas Worland and his brother, Barnabas, are listed by Webb among the earliest settlers in Scott County, Kentucky, but at a later date they were among the prominent citizens of Lexington. Then again later they appear both to have been in Scott County again. This trip from Maryland to Kentucky was a long and arduous one. It was usually made by flatboat from the present site of Pittsburgh to Limestone, now Maysville, Kentucky. A, quote, flatboat was very simple, and many stopped at Pittsburgh and built their own. One consisted of, quote, a raft of rough or hewed logs, rectangular in shape, with sides 2 or 3 feet high. Some were partly covered. On others a tent or awning was the only protection offered the emigrant and his family, unquote. These people, quote, were able to bring with them from Maryland only the bare essentials in the matter of covering and clothing, in addition to food for the journey, unquote. Consequently, most of the furniture for the new home was made near at hand. This home consisted of a rude log cabin thrown up with the help of neighbors and friends. Tables were made of stumps of trees or slabs of wood. Roughly put together, stools and benches took the place of chairs. Wooden plates and bowls served as dishes for a period. Beds were formed of rough puncheons, fastened on the wall on one side, and supported by a trunk of a tree on the other. Blankets, knives, forks, and spoons were commonly brought with the emigrants, since their use was required on the journey, unquote. In Scott County, these members of the Worland family were a part of the congregation of the church, which was known at various times by various names, but which I shall call St. Pius's Church. There the Worlands became parishioners of Father Stephen Theodore Badin, the first Catholic priest ordained in the United States. He had been ordained by Bishop Carroll, and delighted in calling himself the proto-priest ordained by the proto-bishop. Like most of the other missionaries to this area at the time, Father Badin was a refugee from the French Revolution. He was a stern and forbidding taskmaster to his parishioners, believing that they should always arise at 4 o'clock and be about and be about their duties. He taught that any kiss lip to lip by man and wife were mortal sins. Whether this was among the reason that this congregation became notorious for its turbulence, we do not now know. In a letter to Bishop Carroll in September 1809, Father Badin wrote, Mr. Angier made an attempt to build a new chapel in bricks in Scott, but has not been successful, and, indeed, a small acquaintance with the times, men, and business should have been sufficient to forbid the attempt, which was raised new commotions in that almost ungovernable congregation. A brick church 60 feet by 32, as it was contemplated, but cost $2,000. I will be reading all of the opening to my family's tome. This is a big-ass book, but I'll be reading all the opening stuff, all the way to the establishment of Worland, Wyoming, and all that business. I figure I've never known anybody to have read it aloud, had it recorded on the internet, or anything like that. So I figure I'll do this and make sure it gets posted to all Worlands on Facebook. Take care. Dieu le roi.